I pulled into the parking lot of the grocery store, my mind still foggy from the long drive back into town. I hadn't been gone long, just a few days at a friend's lake cabin to clear my head after another exhausting argument with my husband, Stephen. We hadn't been seeing eye to eye for a while now, and I'd needed some space to think. As I stepped out of the car, the breeze hit my face, sharp with early spring chill. I grabbed my phone, intending to call Stephen and let him know I was back, but paused when I noticed a small crowd near the community board outside the store. Curiosity tugged at me. People were staring at something. As I got closer, my breath caught. My face, my actual face, was staring back at me from a missing person poster. My name, Emily Dorsey. Age, 36. Height, weight, hair color, all accurate. Last seen 6 days ago. Underneath, in bold, if you have any information, please contact Stephen Dorsey's spouse. My husband. The man I'd texted just last night to say I'd be coming home in the morning. The man who hadn't responded. I stood frozen, my keys slipping from my hand. Someone beside me murmured, "Poor woman. Hope she's okay." I backed away slowly, heart pounding. Was this some kind of prank? A mistake? But it was my face, my name, my husband's name. I pulled out my phone and called him. It rang once, then voicemail. I tried again, still nothing. A cold weight settled in my chest. I scrolled through our texts. My last message was still marked delivered but unread. That wasn't like him. Stephen always kept his phone on him, especially when he wanted to make sure I knew where he was, especially when he was controlling my time, my movements, my decisions. That creeping dread I'd been trying to ignore for months returned like a punch in the gut. I got in the car and drove past our house, slowing down as I neared the driveway. My car, the one I hadn't taken to the cabin, was gone. So was his. But what stopped me cold was the front door. The locks had been changed. I recognized the new keypad. We'd talked about upgrading months ago, but I didn't know he'd actually done it. I parked a block away and walked back on foot, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. I tried my old key, but it didn't work. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I snatched it up, hopeful, but it was a news alert. Not Stephen. I stared at the screen, hand trembling. I'd been gone for 6 days. Long enough for a missing persons report, but why hadn't he mentioned it in our texts? Why file a report and not try to call me? Unless he didn't want me to be found. I spent that night at a cheap motel under my maiden name. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. If Stephen truly believed I was missing, I could walk into any precinct and clear it up. But something in my gut screamed that wasn't what this was. This wasn't a panicked husband desperate to find his wife. This was too clean, too fast. 6 days? No calls to my friend Rachel, where I'd been staying. No family group messages, no Facebook posts from him begging for help. Just a poster, a cold, official poster, hung like an obituary pinned to a wall. I barely slept. My mind kept looping through old arguments. Stephen telling me I was unstable when I questioned his late nights. Stephen suggesting I take a break for my mental health. Stephen once joking after a Dateline rerun that if he ever wanted to get rid of someone, he'd make it look like they just disappeared. I thought he was being dramatic. But now, in the harsh motel lighting, nothing felt like a joke. The next morning, I went to Rachel's and asked her to quietly check if anyone had come asking about me. No one had. Not Stephen, not the police, not anyone. She looked worried, asked if I was okay, if I wanted to call someone. I told her I just needed a few days to figure things out. I didn't want to drag her into it, not until I understood what was happening. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and searched for Emily Dorsey missing. The poster had already been posted on local news sites. My photo, one Stephen had taken on our last anniversary, was now part of a news story about my sudden disappearance and Stephen's growing concern. In the article, he was quoted saying, "She left home and never came back. I'm terrified something happened to her." Underneath was a photo of him sitting in our living room, his face drawn in a mask of anguish, hands folded in his lap. But it was a face I knew too well. That wasn't grief, that was performance. And for the first time since seeing that poster, I felt something stronger than fear, rage. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out what it was. The morning after I saw my face on that poster, I returned to our street just after sunrise. I wore a hoodie pulled low and sunglasses even though the sun hadn't fully risen. I didn't want anyone to recognize me, especially not the neighbors. I parked on the next block and walked the familiar sidewalk like a stranger, keeping my head down. My heart was pounding with every step. From a distance, our house looked unchanged. Neat lawn, porch light still on, the small ceramic sign that read "Welcome Home" still beside the front door. I stood across the street and waited. At 7:24 a.m., Steven's car pulled into the driveway. I crouched behind a hedge. He stepped out wearing a freshly pressed shirt, suit jacket over his arm, coffee in hand. Casual, composed, not the frantic movements of a man who believed his wife was missing. He unlocked the front door and disappeared inside. A few minutes later, the porch light turned off. It struck me how normal everything looked. I could almost pretend that nothing had changed. Until I remembered that inside that house, my husband had made the world believe I had vanished. I wanted to confront him. Part of me burned to storm through that front door and demand answers. But something stopped me. Instinct. The same gut feeling that had kept me from returning home the night before. I needed to understand what I was walking into. I needed proof, something that confirmed I wasn't losing my mind. So, I did what I never thought I'd do. I hired someone. That same morning, I found a private investigator online. His name was Jake Monroe. He'd been a cop once, but now handled everything from cheating spouses to asset recovery. I called using a burner phone I'd picked up earlier at a gas station and gave him a false name, Rachel Fields, to protect my identity. We agreed to meet at a quiet diner on the edge of town. I arrived early and took the booth in the back. Jake was 10 minutes late, tall, with silver streaks in his hair and a look in his eyes that said he didn't like to waste time. I told him a version of the truth, that I suspected my husband had filed a false missing persons report about his wife, that I believed something was wrong, but I couldn't go to the police yet because it might backfire. I didn't tell him I was the woman on the poster. Not yet. He listened without interrupting, then leaned back, arms crossed. "You want me to dig into him?" he said. "You think he's hiding something?" I nodded. "I don't want to accuse anyone without evidence. I just want to know what he's doing when he thinks no one's watching." Jake agreed to start immediately. That night, I didn't sleep. My brain wouldn't let me rest. I kept hearing Steven's voice from the news clip saying he feared for my safety. I kept thinking of the changed locks, of the woman I'd seen in our house. Who was she? Was she just a friend? A colleague? Or was she the real reason he wanted me gone? The next afternoon, Jake called. He sounded surprised. "I ran a basic scan," he said. "Your guy's been busy." I sat up in the motel bed. "What do you mean?" He paused. "He filed for an emergency death declaration." I didn't understand at first. "That's for people presumed dead," Jake explained, "usually after a long disappearance. But your husband requested it based on credible evidence of mental instability and risk of self-harm. That's how he justified doing it so fast." My mouth went dry. "How fast?" 3 days, Jake said. "He waited 3 days after you disappeared to begin the process. That's practically unheard of." I stared at the wall, cold sweat forming on my neck. 3 days. That meant the same day I texted him from the cabin telling him I was safe and needed space, he was already laying the groundwork to make me legally dead. Jake wasn't finished. "He also contacted your life insurance company. Asked about payout procedures. I have the name of the rep he spoke to." I couldn't breathe. "He said you'd been struggling emotionally, that you'd left no note, but he found one of your journals with alarming entries, the kind of thing that makes insurance companies nervous." My journals. I hadn't kept one in years, but Steven had access to everything. He could have fabricated anything. He could have taken old receipts, scraps of notes, twisted them into whatever narrative he needed. Jake was silent for a moment. "Rachel," he said, using the name I'd given him, "are you in danger?" I hesitated, then lied. "No, but someone else might be." The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and adrenaline. Jake installed a GPS tracker on Steven's car. He began tailing him, recording everything. What he found confirmed what I'd feared. Steven wasn't grieving, he was dating, publicly, lavish dinners with a younger woman, flowers, smiles. She wasn't someone I recognized from work functions or photos. Jake got her license plate and traced it. Her name was Madison Kerr, 27. No fixed address, no steady employment, recent bankruptcy. Jake described her as a good-looking grifter type, someone who knew how to attach herself to men with resources. Your husband's been seen withdrawing large sums of cash, Jake added. He's either paying her off or starting a new life. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. But it was mine. My name, my house, my husband, my death certificate. I asked Jake to get me inside the house. He warned me it was risky. If he catches you, he could spin it any way he wants, especially with the police already thinking you're unstable. But I needed answers. I needed to see what he'd done in my absence. Jake agreed to create a distraction. The next morning, while Stephen was at work, Jake posed as a delivery man with a fake legal drop-off. The housekeeper let him in, and while she was distracted, I slipped through the side entrance and moved quickly. The inside of the house was the same and yet entirely different. My shoes were gone from the rack. My framed diplomas missing. A photo of Stephen and Madison sat on the mantel where our wedding photo used to be. In the bedroom, the sheets were new, the scent unfamiliar. I found my closet empty, except for one old winter coat and a pair of heels I hadn't worn in years. It was as if I'd never lived there, as if I had never existed. But in the office, I found what I was looking for. In a locked drawer, which Jake had quietly forced open, were files, insurance documents, bank transfers, and most chillingly, a draft obituary. My obituary, complete with a photo and a eulogy written in Stephen's clipped clinical voice. Emily Dorsey, beloved wife, remembered for her quiet strength and compassion. Quiet strength. He'd used my own words against me. I left the house with the documents in my coat, heart pounding in my ears. That night, I stared at the obituary for hours. He'd already written my ending. He'd erased me, but I was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't leave the motel for 2 days after breaking into my old house. The experience had shaken me more than I expected. Not because I was scared of being caught, though I was, but because of how thoroughly Stephen had erased me. It wasn't just that my clothes were gone, or that my pictures had been replaced. It was the way the energy of the house had shifted. The silence felt curated, intentional, as if someone had vacuumed every trace of my presence and replaced it with a bland, artificial substitute. I couldn't stop replaying what I'd found in that drawer. The draft obituary, the insurance paperwork, the notes labeled supporting evidence of mental instability, Emily. It was more than betrayal, it was premeditation. This hadn't been a decision made in the heat of an argument or the aftermath of a broken relationship. Stephen had planned this, patiently, carefully, like a financial transaction, a quiet elimination. Jake called late that night. He'd been digging into Stephen's recent financial activity. "You're not going to like this," he warned before saying anything else. Stephen had transferred $75,000, 0 cents, out of their joint investment account 2 weeks prior to my disappearance. That account, which I had helped build over years of budgeting and overtime nursing shifts, was now closed. The funds had been wired to a newly opened account in his name only, tied to a new address I didn't recognize. "Looks like he's preparing to relocate," Jake said. "And if I had to bet, he's planning to take Miss Madison with him." The cherry on top? He'd made preliminary inquiries about buying property in Arizona under an LLC, no names attached, just signatures and shell corporations. My stomach twisted. He wasn't just erasing me, he was replacing me. I knew I needed to act. Sitting in that motel, I was dangerously close to slipping into numbness, that hollow kind of rage that burns so long it becomes cold. But I couldn't afford to shut down, not when I had one advantage left. I was still legally alive. Barely, yes, but not officially declared dead. Stephen's early filing for the emergency death certificate had been flagged by someone at the insurance company as suspicious. They hadn't yet paid out the policy. That was the crack in his plan, and I was going to pry it wide open. The next day, Jake arranged a meeting with someone from the insurance firm under the pretense of consulting on a fraud concern. I went in disguised, hair dyed a dull brown, thick glasses, cheap blazer. I introduced myself as Rachel Fields and presented a folder of documents that included the obituary draft, the house photos showing Madison, and copies of financial statements Stephen had tried to erase. The representative, a middle-aged woman with skeptical eyes and a wedding ring that sparkled every time she touched her chin, listened quietly. Then she leaned forward. "Do you have any idea how serious these accusations are?" I removed my glasses and met her gaze. "Yes, I do, because I'm Emily Dorsey. And I'm not dead." Her mouth parted slightly, but she recovered quickly. "We'll need to conduct an internal investigation," she said, "but I can assure you, no payout will be issued until this is resolved." It wasn't a promise of justice, but it was a start. That night, I called my sister Hannah. We hadn't spoken in months, not because of any falling out, just life. She was raising 2 kids on her own and lived 3 states away. I told her everything. I don't know what I expected, maybe disbelief or cautious concern, but she didn't even hesitate. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. I told her I needed a place to stay and someone I could trust to help document the next step. Within hours, she'd booked me a ticket and wired money to cover the flight. I flew out at dawn, slipping out of the motel without saying a word to anyone. In Hannah's guest room, surrounded by Legos and faded wallpaper from her kids' earlier years, I began building a case. Jake helped me compile a full timeline. The insurance application, the transfers, the public appearances with Madison, the false statements to the police. But the most important piece, the one that would make or break everything, was the evidence of my supposed mental breakdown. Stephen had submitted it to both the police and the insurance company to justify his actions. Jake tracked down the psychologist who had allegedly written a report diagnosing me with paranoid delusions, emotional dysregulation, and suicidal ideation. Her name was Dr. Brenda Kellerman. She practiced 2 towns over. Jake called her under the guise of requesting a follow-up on a previous patient. Her answer was simple and devastating. "I've never evaluated a woman named Emily Dorsey." That was it. That was the proof I needed. A forged psychiatric evaluation was not just unethical, it was criminal. If I could present it to the right people, I could expose Stephen for fraud, false reporting, and attempted insurance deception. Jake advised caution. "You only get 1 shot at this. If you go to the police now, they might bury it. Or worse, tip him off before you're ready." He was right. I needed something bigger, public, unignorable, a platform that Stephen couldn't control. That's when I remembered something. A few years ago, Stephen and I had done a local news segment about hospital volunteers. It was a puff piece, nothing major, but the anchor had taken a liking to Stephen. She'd even joked about him coming back for a spotlight on Husbands of the Year. I still had her business card. It was time to make a call. When Diana picked up, I was blunt. "I have a story," I said, "and if you run it, you're going to win an Emmy. Because the man you once called Husband of the Year is trying to fake my death, and I have the proof." Silence. "Then, can you meet me tomorrow?" I hung up, heart racing. The trap was set. Now I just had to walk into it carefully and make sure Stephen was the one who got caught in the jaws. The news station looked smaller in person than it had on television. A squat brick building with a few satellite dishes on the roof and tinted windows that reflected the early afternoon sun. I arrived 15 minutes early and waited in the rental car Jake had helped me secure. My nerves were shredding, but I forced myself to breathe through it. This was the moment everything would either start to unravel or fall apart. I had 1 chance to show the world what Stephen had done, and I was betting everything on a woman I hadn't seen in years and barely knew beyond a professional handshake. But sometimes, that's all it takes. 1 person with a camera and a conscience. Diana met me in the lobby. She hadn't changed much since the volunteer segment, polished, with the calm demeanor of someone used to smiling through chaos. She gave me a curious look when she approached, and I realized she hadn't expected me to look so ordinary. That's what dying does to people. It gives them a cinematic glow. "The real thing is messier." "Emily," she said quietly, "I read your email. I didn't believe it at first." I handed her the file folder I'd been clutching like a life raft. Inside, copies of the forged psychological report, the bank transfers, the draft obituary, and screenshots of messages Jake had recovered from Madison's social media that made it very clear she believed Emily was out of the picture for good. Diana flipped through the papers, her mouth tightening. Jesus, she whispered. He really tried to bury you? She brought me into a side studio, empty except for 2 chairs, a camera, and a floor lamp. No full production crew, just her, a cameraman named Paul, and a quiet assistant who offered me water. I declined. My throat was too tight to swallow. Diana sat across from me and took off her blazer, signaling that this wasn't going to be a glossy, rehearsed puff piece. This was going to be raw. You understand? She said. If we air this, it will go viral. You'll be on every major outlet within 48 hours. That means Steven will know. He'll respond. He might even try to flip it on you. I nodded. Let him try. I sat straighter, looked into the lens, and said the words I'd been holding inside for weeks. My name is Emily Dorsey. I'm not missing, I'm not dead. But my husband wanted me to be. The interview lasted over an hour. Diana asked everything, how it started, when I realized something was wrong, the moment I saw the poster. I told her everything. I didn't cry. I didn't let my voice break. I spoke with the clarity of someone who had been silenced too long and was finally being heard. At one point, she asked why I hadn't gone to the police. I said, because they already believed him. He painted me as unstable, irrational, depressed. I was afraid they'd lock me in a psych ward instead of asking questions. And he knew that. He used it. Afterward, Deanna promised the story would air within 48 hours, giving us time to coordinate with the insurance company and the legal contacts Jake had secured. She also gave me a copy of the raw footage and a contact at a national investigative podcast, just in case. This isn't just a story, she said as we stood by the exit. This is a takedown. And the world loves a takedown. I left the studio lightheaded, as though something massive had shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I felt like I was hunting. Back at Hannah's house, Jake was waiting. He had a grim look on his face that set me on edge. I found something you need to see, he said, handing me a thin manila folder. Inside were court documents sealed but accessed through legal databases Jake still had access to from his days on the force. At the top of the page was a name I didn't recognize, Lisa D. Kessler. The details made my blood run cold. 10 years ago, Steven had been engaged to Lisa. She'd gone missing for 2 weeks, eventually found alive but hospitalized for what the court described as psychological distress and suspected poisoning. The charges were dropped. Lisa refused to testify. She disappeared shortly after being released. She changed her name and moved to another state, Jake said. But the pattern is almost identical, isolated, undermined, then gone. My stomach turned. I had always believed that Steven had a past. Who doesn't? But this was something else. This wasn't just emotional abuse or fraud. This was predatory, rehearsed. It dawned on me then that I might not be the first woman he tried to erase, just the first one who survived long enough to fight back. I sat in silence, holding the folder, my mind racing. All the pieces I hadn't understood before clicked into place. The controlling behavior, the gaslighting, the carefully crafted image of the perfect husband, the grieving partner, the pillar of the community. It was all a mask, and behind it was something dark, something dangerous. Jake was cautious. You sure you want to go through with this? Once this airs, it'll blow everything up. He'll know exactly who exposed him. I didn't hesitate. Good. Let him know. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation, legal notices, statements from the insurance company confirming the policy was frozen, a quiet tip sent to the state medical board about the forged psychological report. Every move we made tightened the news, and finally, on a rainy Thursday night, the story aired. It began with Diana's voiceover B-roll footage of Steven speaking at a local community fundraiser, smiling, shaking hands, wiping away a performative tear as he spoke of his missing wife. Then the screen cut to me, alive, unbroken, and telling the world exactly what he'd done. By morning, the video had over 2 million views. My inbox was flooded. News crews camped outside Steven's office. The insurance company issued a public statement confirming the policy was under investigation, and the police finally began asking questions. Steven, for his part, went silent. No public statement, no press conference. But I knew him. He was calculating. He wouldn't lash out. He'd regroup, plot, and that made him even more dangerous. Which is why I made the next move before he could. I filed for a restraining order, submitted the full timeline to the local DA, and, through Diana's help, arranged to appear on a national morning show the following week. Not just to tell my story, but to expose the cracks in the systems that let men like Stephen manipulate the narrative. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every woman who had been gaslit into silence, every survivor labeled unstable to excuse someone else's violence. And I was going to make damn sure they saw what I did next. The moment the segment aired, it was like a match dropped into gasoline. I expected backlash, I expected disbelief, and I expected that Stephen would try to regain control of the narrative. But I underestimated just how calculated he truly was. Within 12 hours, his lawyer issued a press release claiming I was deeply unwell, that I had fabricated an elaborate story fueled by personal vendettas and unresolved psychological trauma. He accused me of slander, of invasion of privacy, and of orchestrating a public stunt to humiliate a man who had done nothing but try to support and protect his wife during a mental health crisis. I read the statement 3 times before laughing out loud. It was exactly what I expected and exactly what I needed, because in his rush to defend himself publicly, he'd gone on record with lies that I could dismantle one by one. But the court of public opinion had already begun shifting. The comments on the news video were filled with people who saw through him, women mostly who recognized the patterns, survivors who said they'd lived through something similar. He said I was crazy too, one wrote, and I started to believe him. Thank you, Emily, for not letting him bury you. That night, I sat in Hannah's kitchen, reading them until my eyes burned. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Jake was already 5 steps ahead, building out the next phase of our plan. It's time to make it official, he said. We're gonna catch him trying to collect. Stephen's emergency petition to have me declared deceased was still pending review in family court. The insurance company had frozen the claim, but the civil documents he submitted could still be acted on, and he didn't know that. That meant we had a narrow window to bait him into moving forward with the final fraud attempt while we watched from the shadows. Jake knew someone who worked in the courthouse records department. We planted a rumor, subtly, through a fake social media account tied to an anonymous legal blogger that the judge assigned to the death declaration cases had begun signing off on approvals due to backlog. Within 36 hours, Stephen's lawyer resubmitted the petition with a request for expedited ruling, citing emotional distress. He was trying to push it through before the rest of the world caught up. The trap was nearly set. All we needed now was a venue, a place to deliver the final blow, one he couldn't wriggle out of. That's when I remembered Madison. I hadn't seen her in any press statements. Stephen was keeping her hidden, probably trying to preserve his image. But Madison was vain. She wasn't going to sit quietly forever. And sure enough, a week after the story aired, she posted a picture on her private Instagram. She and Stephen at a formal gala event hosted by a local business development board. The caption read, "He's my safe place." She'd tagged the venue. Jake called in a favor and got us tickets. I would attend wearing a dark blue gown, my hair styled differently, with contact lenses that shifted my eye color just enough to make me pass at first glance. Jake would shadow me nearby, recording everything. The plan was simple. I'd walk in, wait for the perfect moment, and then make myself known, not just to Stephen and Madison, but to every person in that room with a camera in their hand. The night of the event, I could barely breathe. My legs felt hollow as I stepped out of the rideshare car and walked toward the building's entrance. Security checked my ID, fake but good enough, and waved me through. Inside, the ballroom glowed with warm lighting and soft jazz, glasses clinking, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. I spotted them almost immediately. Stephen was standing near the center of the room, arm around Madison, who was wearing a gold dress, like she thought she'd already won something. He looked calm, charming, like he was hosting instead of attending. That smug expression he wore so well was fully intact. I waited. 15 minutes. Then 30. Let them relax. Let them enjoy it. When I moved, I didn't walk up to them directly. I positioned myself near the hors d'oeuvres table, where the photographer was making rounds for official shots. When he turned toward me, I smiled politely and said, "Mind if I get one from this angle?" He nodded and handed me the camera. I aimed it directly at Stephen and Madison and clicked 3 times, then walked straight toward them, handing the camera back to the photographer on the way. When I was a few feet away, Stephen looked up, his eyes scanning me, and for a moment, he didn't recognize me. Then, he did. His face drained of color so fast it made my breath catch. Madison turned, confused, then confused again when he staggered back a step. "Emily," he said. Not loud, just barely above a whisper, but it echoed in my head like a bell. "Hi, Stephen," I said calmly. "You look surprised. You shouldn't be. You always said I was hard to get rid of." Around us, conversations started to slow. People turned. A few already had their phones out. "She's dead," he muttered. "She's supposed to be dead." He looked at Madison, who took a shaky step away from him. "She faked it," he blurted. "She's doing this for attention." That was all I needed. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a manila envelope. "This," I said loudly, "contains a forged psychiatric evaluation, a timeline of your financial transactions, and a sworn statement from Dr. Brenda Kellerman saying she never met me in her life." A few audible gasps. Cameras clicked. Madison's face paled as she turned and walked away without a word. Stephen reached for the envelope, but I pulled it back. "Oh no," I said. "This one's for the district attorney, but don't worry, I'll send you a copy. In prison." I walked away before he could speak again, past the stunned faces and blinking cameras, past the whispers and the flashes. Jake was already waiting at the exit, nodding. "You did it," he said. But I wasn't smiling yet, not until the cuffs were on his wrists, not until the justice system caught up. But I had taken back the narrative. I had dragged the truth into the light. And Stephen couldn't hide behind his lies anymore. Not from me, not from the world. The fallout from the gala hit like a landslide. By the next morning, the video clip of my confrontation with Stephen was everywhere. Someone had caught the entire thing on their phone. The moment he recognized me, the panic in his voice, the envelope in my hand, the stunned silence of the crowd. It was on TikTok, Twitter, even late-night television. The woman who came back from the dead to expose her husband became a viral headline. But for me, it wasn't about views or sympathy. It was about pressure. The kind of pressure institutions couldn't ignore. And that pressure started to work. Within 48 hours, Stephen was served with a court summons to respond to my restraining order. By the end of the week, the DA had opened a formal investigation into the forged documents and insurance fraud. The police finally came knocking, but not for me. I wasn't there when they arrested him. Jake was. He said it was almost anticlimactic. Stephen had been holed up in a short-term rental with his lawyer and a duffel bag of cash, probably hoping to negotiate a deal or quietly disappear. But the cameras were already outside. The media had caught wind of the timeline I'd submitted. Every lie, every document, every transfer. And they weren't about to let this case get swept under the rug. So when they showed up at the rental property with a warrant, there was nowhere left for him to run. He didn't resist. He didn't even speak. Just lowered his head and got in the car. The image of him in cuffs, eyes downcast, plastered across every local news outlet, brought me no joy. What it brought was closure. Not complete, not yet, but the first solid step toward it. I met with the district attorney in person 2 days after Stephen's arrest. The room was sterile, all glass and fluorescent lights, but the woman sitting across from me was sharp. She asked detailed questions. She wanted to know everything. When the manipulation started, how he isolated me, how long I'd suspected something was wrong. I told her all of it. I handed over copies of every file Jake and I had gathered, including new footage from a neighbor's security camera that showed Stephen removing boxes from our house the day after I'd supposedly disappeared. "We believe he intended to fabricate a mental health crisis," the DA said, eating legal documents, forged medical records, and initiated a fraudulent insurance claim with the intent, we think, of financial gain. That's a criminal conspiracy, possibly attempted manslaughter depending on what else we find. I sat there, numb, barely registering the words. I had spent so long trying to survive that justice still felt abstract. But now, someone in power was finally saying what I knew to be true. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was dangerous. And then came the trial. I wasn't prepared for the emotional toll of it. Walking into that courtroom, seeing him again in his suit, his expression carefully composed like he thought the performance could still save him. It rattled me. He pled not guilty, of course. His defense leaned hard on mental health narratives, insisting I had fabricated everything, that I was an unstable woman trying to destroy a good man's life, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The forged psychiatric report alone would have sunk him, but combined with the insurance trail, the draft obituary, and Madison's eventual statement, it was airtight. Yes, Madison flipped. I don't know what finally made her come around, fear of prosecution, guilt, or realizing she was never going to be his endgame, but she submitted a signed affidavit that confirmed Stephen had told her I was out of the picture and that the life insurance money would set them up. She claimed she didn't know the full extent of the plan. Maybe she was telling the truth. I didn't care. I didn't need her apology. I needed her testimony. The most surreal moment came when I took the stand. I looked at the jury, 12 strangers, and told them how it started with little things. How Stephen isolated me, made me doubt my own memory, painted me as fragile to our friends, how he smiled at dinner parties and whispered venom in private, how he used words like concern and love to mask control, and how, finally, he tried to erase me altogether. I told them about the poster, the fake report, the bank accounts. I told them I'd woken up one day and realized the person I trusted most in the world wanted me gone, and that I'd had to prove my own existence just to survive. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation, guilty on all counts. Insurance fraud, document forgery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. The judge called his actions calculated, predatory, and chilling in their precision. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison without parole. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead I felt a strange stillness settle over me. A quiet ending to a nightmare I'd lived through for far too long. The weeks after the trial passed in a blur. I moved into a new apartment in a neighboring state, changed my phone number, cut off contact with anyone who had been close to Stephen. The producers from the morning show called again. They wanted a follow-up segment. I declined. I'd told my story, the rest was mine to keep. I did, however, accept an invitation to speak at a nonprofit event for women who'd survived domestic manipulation and coercive control. Standing in front of a room full of women like me, I realized that the real victory wasn't just in sending Stephen to prison. It was in reclaiming my narrative, in refusing to be the victim he'd tried to cast me as, in standing up and saying, no, this is not how my story ends. I still have bad dreams. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still in that motel room, staring at my own missing person poster. Sometimes I check my locks twice before bed. But I'm healing. I see a therapist. I go for walks. I plant things. I write. I live. And that, above all, is the final wound he never got to inflict. Because I am alive, because I fought, because I won. It's strange how silence can sound different after everything. The same kind of quiet I once feared. Those long, hollow nights in the motel. The breathless stillness while hiding outside my own home. Now feels like peace. Real peace. No ticking clock, no paranoia clawing at the back of my mind, no shadows stretching over my shoulder. Just quiet, clean, and solid. It's been 6 months since the trial and have built something new. It's not dramatic or flashy, just a rented cottage near the edge of a small town where no one knows my name unless I tell them, where I can walk to the farmer's market on Saturdays and not think about whether someone is tracking me or watching from a window or building a lie big enough to make me disappear again. I kept my name. That might sound strange after everything Stephen tried to do with it, forge it, stain it, bury it, but I refused to let him take it from me. Emily Dorsey is not the woman he said she was. Emily Dorsey is the woman who came back, and I wanted the world to remember that. I didn't vanish, I wasn't erased, I survived, and I did so on my own terms. That name is mine. It belonged to the woman who fought for her own life when no one else believed she was still breathing. I started volunteering again, just once a week, at a legal aid center that helps women get out of controlling or dangerous relationships. I don't tell them my full story unless they ask. Most of them don't. They just want someone to believe them, and when they see I do, truly, deeply do, it's enough. I've learned that survival doesn't always come with loud victories. Sometimes it's just sitting across from another person and saying, "You're not crazy, he is, and I believe you." Sometimes that's more powerful than any courtroom sentence. I visited my sister last month. Hannah cried when she opened the door, even though we'd been talking constantly since it all ended. She hugged me like she was still making sure I was real. I stayed in the same guest room where I rebuilt my life on a laptop between piles of Legos and art projects. Her kids ran to me screaming, "Aunt Emmy," like they had no idea their voices had once been the only light I had. They probably didn't. And that's good. Children should never know the full shape of darkness. They should just know the sound of your laugh when you've learned how to use it again. As for Stephen, the last I heard, he was appealing the sentence. Of course he was. Control is his last drug. But I'm not worried. The truth is too loud now, too documented, too public. His name is a stain that won't wash out, and mine is a story that can't be silenced. Let him spend his days behind concrete and steel with only his own manipulation to keep him company. That prison is smaller than the one he built for me, and unlike him, I have the key to mine. I kept one thing from the trial, a copy of the missing person poster. I framed it not out of spite, but as a reminder. It hangs in my hallway, just beside the front door of my cottage. I pass it every day. It shows the world's version of me at my most erased, my most voiceless. But now it hangs in a place I chose, in a home I created, on a wall no one else controls. It used to be a symbol of fear. Now it's proof I was lost, but I found myself. And no one will ever make me disappear again.